The retirement party was everything I dreamed it would be until it became my nightmare. 43 years of dedicated service to Henderson and Associates, and they'd thrown me a beautiful farewell celebration in the company's main conference room. Colleagues, friends, and family gathered around tables adorned with white roses and golden balloons. I spotted my son Michael across the room, his arm around his wife Jessica. She looked stunning as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, designer dress hugging her figure. I approached them with a carefully wrapped gift in my hands, a simple box tied with silver ribbon. "Jessica, dear," I said, extending the package toward her. "I wanted to give you something special to mark this occasion." She accepted it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The room quieted as she unwrapped it, and I held my breath, anticipating her joy when she discovered what lay hidden within the folds. The tissue paper fell away, revealing a soft, burgundy cashmere scarf. Jessica held it up, examined it for exactly 3 seconds, then threw her head back and laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the celebration like a blade. "Oh my God, Margaret. A scarf from Target." Her voice carried across the room. "This is what you give someone for retirement? I thought you'd at least splurge a little." The laughter that rippled through the crowd felt like 1,000 tiny knives. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. I felt every eye in the room turn toward us, some filled with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. Mrs. Patterson from accounting looked away quickly, while Bob from the mailroom actually snickered behind his hand. "Jessica," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "If you look more carefully." "Oh, Margaret, don't be embarrassed," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I mean, it's the thought that counts, right? Even if the thought was, well, minimal." My face burned with humiliation. 43 years of building respect and relationships, and this was how it would be remembered. The woman who gave discount scarves at her own retirement party. I glanced around desperately, hoping someone would speak up, would defend me. Instead, I watched as my colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their eyes suddenly finding their drinks fascinating. The worst part? Jessica tucked the scarf carelessly into her purse without a second glance, completely missing what I'd spent months planning. The car ride home was suffocating. Michael drove while Jessica scrolled through her phone, occasionally giggling at something on the screen. I sat in the back seat, invisible, my heart still pounding from the humiliation. "Mom seems upset," Michael finally said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Oh, come on," Jessica replied without looking up. "She's being dramatic. It was just a joke." Everyone laughed. "That's exactly the problem," I managed to say. Later, at home, I sought comfort from Robert, my husband of 48 years. He was reading his newspaper in his favorite chair, barely glancing up when I entered. "Robert, what happened tonight?" "Margaret, honey, don't make a mountain out of a molehill." He folded the paper with a sharp snap. "Jessica's young. She doesn't understand the value of thoughtful gifts yet. You're taking this too seriously." But she humiliated me in front of everyone. She was just having fun. "Don't be so sensitive." The dismissal in his voice was almost worse than Jessica's laughter. My own husband, who should have been my ally, my comfort, was brushing off my pain like it was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. By morning, the humiliation had gone digital. I discovered it when my neighbor called, her voice tight with awkward sympathy. "Margaret, dear, I think you should see Jessica's Instagram post." With trembling fingers, I navigated to her profile. There it was, a photo of the scarf, draped mockingly across her marble kitchen counter, with the caption, "When your mother-in-law's generous retirement gift screams clearance rack face with tears of joy, #blessed, #expectations, #reality." The comments were brutal. "OMG dying. My Emile would do something like this loudly crying face, *. At least she tried, maybe. Woman shrugging, *. I can't even, the secondhand embarrassment is real, *. Wait until you inherit her house, then you can afford real gifts, money with wings, *. Each comment felt like a physical blow. My retirement celebration, my dignity, my decades of hard work, all reduced to social media mockery for the entertainment of strangers. Robert found me crying at the kitchen table, phone in hand. For heaven's sake, Margaret, it's just the internet. Nobody takes these things seriously. But they did. Oh, they did. That night, alone in my bedroom, I retrieved the scarf from where I'd hidden it after Jessica carelessly left it on the hallway table. My hands shook as I examined the soft cashmere, feeling along the careful stitching near the label. It was still there. The thing that would have changed everything. The thing that would have made Jessica's cruel laughter die in her throat if she'd bothered to look. I pressed the scarf to my chest and wept for my ruined retirement celebration, for the respect I'd lost, for the years of sacrifice that had gone unrecognized. But most of all, I wept for the generous heart I'd had, the heart that had wanted to give everything to a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. In the darkness of my room, clutching the secret that no one had bothered to discover, I made a decision that would change everything. They wanted to treat me like I was worthless? Fine. I'd show them exactly what worthless looked like. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, the scarf spread before me. My fingers traced the hidden pocket I'd sewn with my own hands, remembering the sacrifices that had made its contents possible. 3 years ago, when I'd first learned about Jessica's shopping addiction and mounting credit card debt, I'd quietly sold my mother's jewelry collection, pieces I'd treasured for decades. The vintage Cartier watch, the pearl necklace my father had given her for their anniversary, the diamond earrings she'd worn to my wedding. I'd sold them all, one by one, to a discreet dealer in the city. Every piece went toward what I'd planned to give Jessica: a fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to begin their marriage without the burden of debt. I remembered the day I'd gone to the bank, withdrawing my life savings, every penny I'd scraped together from 43 years of careful budgeting and modest indulgences I'd denied myself. $27,000. Everything I had. It was supposed to be the down payment on their first house, combined with the other gift hidden in that scarf. I'd imagined Jessica's tears of gratitude, her apology for all the snide comments about my cheap lifestyle. I'd pictured Michael's pride in having a mother who would sacrifice everything for his happiness. Instead, I got laughter, mockery, public humiliation. The memory of her cruel cackle echoed in my mind as I fingered the sealed envelope that still rested in the scarf's hidden fold. With reverent care, I opened the secret pocket I'd sewn into the scarf's lining. The envelope emerged, thick and formal, bearing the letterhead of Patterson, Wells and Associates, the law firm where my college roommate now worked as a senior partner. Inside was a cashier's check for $27,000 and a deed transfer document for the small cottage I owned in Cape Cod. The one I'd inherited from my aunt, the one worth nearly $200,000 in today's market. The cottage where Michael had spent every childhood summer, where he'd learned to fish with his grandfather, where he'd brought Jessica for their first weekend getaway as a couple. She'd fallen in love with it immediately, constantly hinting about how wonderful it would be to own a place like that someday. The deed transfer was already signed and notarized. All it had needed was Jessica's signature to make her the sole owner of both properties, the cottage and the vacant lot next to it that came with it. I'd spent months with lawyers, arranging every detail. The total gift would have been worth over $250,000. Enough to change their lives completely. Now, staring at these documents, I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. The paperwork had an expiration date, 30 days from the retirement party. If not executed by then, the transfer would be void. 28 days left. The family dinner the following Sunday was torture by design. Jessica had insisted on hosting, ostensibly to make up for the little misunderstanding at the retirement party. But I knew better. This was her stage, her opportunity to play the gracious daughter-in-law while establishing her dominance. She served dinner on the china set I'd given her for her wedding, the one that had belonged to my grandmother, the one she'd initially claimed was too old-fashioned, until she discovered its value on an antiques website. "Margaret, you look tired," she said sweetly, passing the potatoes. Retirement must be such an adjustment. Not having anywhere important to be, nothing meaningful to contribute. Robert chuckled. She's been moping around the house all week. I keep telling her she needs a hobby. Oh, absolutely. Jessica's eyes lit up with false enthusiasm. Maybe you could take up knitting? Make some more scarves? The table erupted in polite laughter that felt like acid in my wounds. Michael said nothing, focused intently on his plate. Speaking of contributions, Jessica continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, Michael and I have been thinking about the future, about family legacy and responsibility. She reached over and squeezed my son's hand. We want to make sure we're positioned to take care of Robert and Margaret when the time comes. The implication was clear. They weren't planning to take care of us. They were planning to inherit from us. After all, she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, everything will come to us eventually anyway. After dinner, I cornered Michael in the kitchen while Jessica entertained Robert with stories about her latest shopping adventures. Michael, we need to talk about what happened at the retirement party. He sighed, not meeting my eyes. Mom, you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. She humiliated me in front of everyone I've worked with for decades.
She was just joking around.
You know how Jess is, she's got a sharp sense of humor. Sharp. I stared at my son. This man I'd raised to be better than this. Michael, that wasn't humor. That was cruelty. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me. There was no warmth, no love, no respect. Just mild irritation, as if I were a persistent fly buzzing around his perfect life. Look, Mom, I get that your feelings were hurt. But Jessica works hard to fit into this family, and sometimes she says things without thinking. You could try being a little more understanding. Understanding. The word came out as a whisper. Besides, he continued, warming to his topic, it's not like you spent a lot of money on the gift. If you'd gotten her something nicer, she wouldn't have reacted that way. And there it was. My own son, defending his wife's right to mock me, suggesting that I deserved the humiliation because I'd been too cheap to earn better treatment. You're right, I said quietly. I should have known better. He smiled, thinking he'd won.
Exactly.
No harm done, right? Wrong, I thought, watching him return to the dining room where his wife was holding court. So very, very wrong. That night, I lay awake listening to Robert's snores, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The events of the past week played on repeat in my mind. Jessica's laughter, the crowd's amusement, Robert's dismissal, Michael's betrayal. For 48 years, I'd been the perfect wife, mother, and daughter-in-law. I'd swallowed my pride, bitten my tongue, and sacrificed my own needs for the sake of family harmony. I'd worked full-time while raising Michael, had taken care of Robert's ailing mother for 7 years, had given and given and given until there was almost nothing left of myself. And this was my reward: to be mocked, dismissed, and treated like an inconvenience by the very people I'd spent my life serving. I thought about the hidden envelope, still tucked away in my dresser drawer. $27,000 and a deed that would have set Jessica and Michael up for life. The gift I'd nearly bankrupted myself to provide, all because I'd loved them enough to sacrifice everything. But love, I was learning, wasn't always enough. Sometimes love made you vulnerable. Sometimes it made you a target for those who mistake kindness for weakness. I slipped out of bed and walked to my dresser, retrieving the envelope. In the moonlight streaming through the window, I stared at the documents that represented the last of my financial security, my final gesture of maternal love. Then I smiled for the first time in a week. If they wanted to treat me like I was worthless, like I had nothing to offer, like I was just an obstacle between them and their inheritance, then perhaps it was time to show them exactly what nothing looked like. The war Jessica had started with her laughter was about to escalate in ways she couldn't imagine. Monday morning, I dressed in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to important meetings during my corporate days. I wanted to look like the competent, decisive woman I'd been before I'd let family obligations diminish me. The bank manager, a pleasant woman named Linda who'd handled my accounts for over a decade, greeted me with professional warmth. "Mrs. Henderson, congratulations on your retirement. How can I help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I want to remove Robert from our joint savings account and transfer the funds to a new account, in my name only." Linda's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, though I should mention that will require your husband's signature for—" "Actually, no." I opened my purse and retrieved a folder I'd prepared. "I've done my research. The account was opened with my maiden name as the primary holder when I was single. Robert was added later as a beneficiary, not as a joint owner. Legally, I can remove him without his consent." Linda examined the documents, her eyebrows rising. "You're absolutely right. I apologize for the confusion. This is unusual, but perfectly legal." Within an hour, I'd moved $48,000, our entire life savings, into a new account that only I could access. I also opened a safety deposit box and transferred ownership of all our investment certificates and bonds to my name alone. As I walked out of the bank, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. For the first time in decades, I controlled my own financial destiny. One down, I murmured to myself, several to go. Patricia Wells had been my roommate at State University nearly 50 years ago. We'd stayed in touch through Christmas cards and occasional lunch dates, but I'd never needed her professional services before. Her law office occupied the entire top floor of a prestigious downtown building, a testament to her success in estate planning and family law. "Margaret." She stood to greet me, her silver hair perfectly styled, her handshake firm and confident. "What a lovely surprise. Though from your phone call, I gather this isn't entirely social. I need to update my will, Patty." "Completely." Her expression grew serious as I explained the situation, carefully, without too much emotion, sticking to facts. Jessica's public humiliation, Michael's betrayal, Robert's dismissal of my feelings. The retirement gift that had gone unappreciated because no one had bothered to look beyond the surface. "I see," Patricia said when I finished. "And what changes would you like to make?" "I want Michael and Jessica removed entirely. Everything should go to charity, the American Heart Association, the local women's shelter, the scholarship fund at my old high school." Patricia made careful notes. "What about Robert? He can keep the house and his pension, but nothing else. And I want a clause that if he tries to contest the will or give any of his inheritance to Michael, he forfeits everything, and it all goes to charity too." "That's quite comprehensive." Patricia studied me carefully. "Margaret, I have to ask, are you certain about this? Wills can be changed again if you reconsider, but this is a significant step." I've never been more certain of anything in my life. 3 hours later, I walked out with a new will, properly witnessed and notarized. Michael and Jessica's guaranteed inheritance had just evaporated, though they wouldn't know it for years. Unless, of course, I decided to tell them sooner. Jessica's call came Tuesday afternoon, her voice bright with false sweetness. "Margaret, I've been thinking about your living situation." "My living situation?" "Well, you and Robert rattling around in that big old house all by yourselves. It just seems so wasteful. Michael and I were discussing it, and we think it would make much more sense for you to sell and move into something smaller, more manageable for people your age." I gripped the phone tighter. "And where would we move?" "Oh, there are lovely senior communities around here. Some really nice apartments. Much easier to maintain than that huge house with all those stairs." What she wasn't saying, but what came through crystal clear, was that she wanted us out so she and Michael could move in. The house that Robert and I had bought 45 years ago, that we'd renovated with our own hands, that held every memory of Michael's childhood, she wanted it for herself. "And what would happen to our house?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Well, since you'll need the money for the senior living facility, you'd sell it, of course. Michael and I would be happy to help you find buyers. In fact, we might even be interested ourselves, to keep it in the family. We could work out some kind of arrangement." "An arrangement? How generous of them to offer to buy our family home for probably half its market value." That's very thoughtful of you to be concerned about our welfare, I said. Oh, we just want what's best for everyone. Maybe we could have lunch this week and discuss some options. I'll think about it, I promised. After I hung up, I called a real estate agent, not to sell, but to get a current market assessment. As I'd suspected, our house was now worth nearly $400,000. Jessica wasn't just angling for a place to live. She was after a massive financial windfall. Too bad she'd burned that bridge with her laughter. The decision to sell my grandmother's engagement ring wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The ring had been in my family for over a century, a stunning 2-carat Edwardian diamond surrounded by sapphires, set in platinum. My grandmother had worn it through the Great Depression, 2 wars, and 57 years of marriage. My mother had treasured it, and I'd planned to pass it to Michael for Jessica someday. But Jessica had made it clear what she thought of my gifts. I took it to Whitmore and Associates, the city's most prestigious auction house. The appraiser, a distinguished man with wire-rimmed glasses, examined it under a jeweler's loupe for several long minutes. "Mrs. Henderson," he said finally, "this is extraordinary. The workmanship is museum quality, and the diamond is internally flawless. Where did you say you acquired this?" "It belonged to my grandmother. My grandfather had it made for their engagement in 1923. The provenance adds considerably to its value. I'd estimate this will bring between $75,000 and $90,000 at auction, possibly more if we get competitive bidding." My legs nearly gave out. $90,000? The setting alone is worth $20,000 as an antique. The diamond. Well, stones of this quality and provenance are increasingly rare. I'd been sitting on a fortune for 30 years, wearing it occasionally to special events, never knowing its true worth. Jessica would have known. She'd remarked several times on how vintage it looked, how old-fashioned the setting was. She'd made it clear she had no appreciation for family heirlooms.
Fine.
Let someone who would treasure it properly own it instead. The auction was held on a rainy Thursday afternoon in Whitmore's elegant showroom. I sat in the back, anonymous among the serious collectors and dealers, watching as my grandmother's ring was displayed under the spotlights. The bidding started at $30,000 and climbed rapidly. 2 private collectors seemed particularly interested, driving the price higher and higher. When the hammer finally fell, the winning bid was $112,000. After the auction house took their commission, I walked out with a certified check for $95,000. Combined with what I'd moved from our joint account and some careful liquidation of other assets over the past week, I now controlled nearly $200,000 that no one else knew about. For the first time in my adult life, I was financially independent. Not dependent on Robert's approval, not beholden to Michael's expectations, not vulnerable to Jessica's manipulations. I deposited the check into my private account and called Patricia Wells. "Patty, I want to set up a trust fund for my own care in old age. I want it structured so that if anything happens to me, the remaining funds go directly to charity. No one else can touch it." "Smart thinking," she said approvingly. "How much are we talking about?" $200,000 to start. Possibly more later. There was a pause. "Margaret, I don't know what's happened in your family, but you're handling it exactly right. Financial independence is the foundation of personal dignity." As I hung up the phone, I smiled at my reflection in the bank's windows. Let Jessica demand that I sell the house. Let Michael assume he'd inherit everything. Let Robert dismiss my concerns as silly. I was no longer the powerless woman they thought they could manipulate and mock. I was a force to be reckoned with, and they had no idea what was coming. Jessica's spending had always been excessive, but over the next few weeks, it reached new heights of absurdity. She seemed to be operating under the assumption that her future inheritance was guaranteed, treating our family's potential wealth as her personal credit line. I watched from my kitchen window as luxury delivery trucks arrived at their house daily. A new designer handbag collection from Italy. A custom dining room set that cost more than most people's cars. Professional landscaping that transformed their modest backyard into something resembling a resort. The coup de grace was the car. A pearl-white BMW convertible that appeared in their driveway on a Tuesday morning, complete with a red bow tied around the antenna. Jessica pranced around it like a teenager, taking selfies from every angle, her social media flooded with captions about treating yourself and living your best life. What she didn't know, what neither she nor Michael knew, was that they'd financed most of these purchases on credit, anticipating the inheritance they thought was coming. I'd done my research, called a few old contacts in the banking industry. Their debt-to-income ratio was astronomical. They were living on borrowed time and borrowed money. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't so pathetic. From my window, I watched Jessica speed off in her new toy, probably heading to show it off to her friends. She had no idea that the inheritance she was spending in advance had already vanished into trust funds and charitable donations. The explosion came at Sunday dinner, 3 weeks after the retirement party. Jessica arrived an hour late, her arms full of shopping bags from boutiques I couldn't afford even when I was working. Sorry, she called out cheerfully, dumping her purchases on our antique coffee table without a care. I got carried away at the mall. You wouldn't believe the sales. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her wrists stacked with gold bracelets that clinked when she moved. Everything about her screamed excess and entitlement. Jessica, I said carefully, don't you think you might be spending a bit too much lately? The room went silent. Robert looked up from his newspaper. Michael paused with his beer halfway to his lips, and Jessica's bright smile faltered. Excuse me? It's just that I've noticed a lot of purchases lately. The car, the furniture, all the shopping trips. I'm concerned about your financial stability. Jessica's laugh was sharp and cold. My financial stability? Margaret, honey, you live in a house from the 1970s and drive a car that's older than some of my shoes. I don't think you're qualified to give financial advice. Jessica, Michael said quietly, but she was just getting started. No, really, let's talk about financial stability. She stood up, her designer heels clicking on our hardwood floors. You worked as a middle manager for 40 years and have what to show for it? A pension that probably barely covers your groceries and a house that needs a complete renovation. Her voice was getting louder, her gestures more animated. Meanwhile, Michael and I are building a real life. We're investing in our future, in quality things that hold their value. Unlike some people, we understand that you have to spend money to make money. And how exactly do you make money? I asked quietly. We don't have to make money yet, she said with a triumphant smile. We're smart enough to plan for the future. We know what's coming to us, and we're positioning ourselves accordingly. The arrogance was breathtaking. She was essentially admitting that she was spending our money before we were dead, confident that we'd continue to bankroll her lifestyle indefinitely. I see, I said. And you're certain about this? Future income. As certain as death and taxes, she said with a laugh, clearly pleased with her own wit. Robert chuckled appreciatively. Michael nodded along. All three of them, united in their certainty that my money would eventually become their money. That's interesting, I said, and excused myself to the kitchen. In the kitchen, I took deep breaths and reminded myself of the Newell sitting safely in Patricia Wells' office, of the trust fund that was growing steadily with interest, of the investments I'd made that would ensure my own comfortable retirement while leaving nothing for the vultures circling our assets. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had moved on to vacation plans. Jessica was describing a cruise she wanted to take, something involving first-class accommodations and private balconies that would cost more than most people's annual salary. Of course, we'll have to wait until after. She paused delicately, glancing at Robert and me. Well, until we're in a better position to afford such things. Until we're dead, she meant. Until they could inherit our assets and really start living. I settled back into my chair and listened to them plan their future with our money, my face carefully neutral. They had no idea that the ground had already shifted beneath their feet, that the foundation of their assumptions had crumbled while they were busy counting chickens that would never hatch. That sounds lovely, I said when Jessica finished describing the penthouse suite she'd selected. I'm sure you'll have wonderful memories. She beamed at me, apparently taking my words as approval and encouragement. Oh, we will. Life's too short not to enjoy the best things, don't you think? Absolutely, I agreed. Life is definitely too short to waste on people who don't appreciate what they have. Something in my tone made Michael look at me sharply, but Jessica was too absorbed in her fantasies to notice the warning. 2 days later, Jessica called a family meeting. She'd set it up like a board presentation, complete with her laptop and a notepad full of bullet points. We gathered in their living room, the one furnished with items that cost more than some people's cars. Robert, Margaret, Michael, and I have been doing some thinking about family finances and long-term planning, she began, her voice taking on the tone of a corporate executive addressing shareholders. She clicked open a spreadsheet on her laptop. We've calculated the approximate value of your assets, the house, Robert's pension, your savings accounts, investments, and life insurance policies. We estimate the total estate value at around $800,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. 800,000? She'd inflated our worth by at least 300,000, apparently factoring in imaginary assets and wildly optimistic property valuations. Now, she continued, we've also researched the best strategies for estate planning and tax minimization. There are several steps we should take now to ensure maximum benefit for the next generation. Next generation. As if she and Michael were the inevitable heirs to everything Robert and I had worked for. First, we recommend establishing a family trust with Michael and me as co-trustees. This would allow us to manage the assets more efficiently and reduce tax liability when the time comes. They wanted control of our money while we were still alive. Second, we think it makes sense to begin transferring ownership of major assets now, rather than waiting. The house, for instance, could be transferred to our names with you maintaining lifetime residency rights. They wanted to own our house while graciously allowing us to live in it until we died. Third, we've identified several investment opportunities that could significantly increase the estate's value over the next decade. They wanted to gamble with our life savings. Robert was nodding along enthusiastically. Michael looked slightly uncomfortable, but said nothing. And I sat there marveling at the sheer audacity of it all. They weren't just planning to inherit our assets. They were planning to control them immediately, reducing us to tenants in our own home and pensioners living on allowances from our own money. When Jessica finished her presentation, she sat back with a satisfied smile, clearly expecting praise for her thoroughness and financial acumen. Well, I said slowly, that's certainly comprehensive. We've put a lot of thought into this, Jessica said proudly. We want to make sure the family's financial future is as secure as possible. The family's future, I repeated. Yes, that's very important. So, what do you think? Michael asked. Should we set up a meeting with a financial planner to get started? I looked around the room, at Jessica's expectant face, at Michael's hopeful expression, at Robert's eager nod. 3 people who had never once asked what I wanted, what I needed, what I dreamed of for my own retirement. 3 people who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding for their ambitions. I think, I said carefully, that planning for the future is indeed very wise. But you know what they say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Jessica's smile flickered. What do you mean? I mean that the future is often quite different from what we expect. Sometimes the things we think are certain aren't. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Sometimes the people we think we can count on disappoint us. The room had gone very quiet. Michael was frowning at me, Robert looked confused, and Jessica's confident expression was beginning to crack. Margaret, Jessica said slowly, you're not making sense. I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd felt in weeks. Oh, dear, I'm making perfect sense. You're just not listening carefully enough. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. But don't worry. You'll understand soon enough. As I left them sitting there in their expensive living room, surrounded by their overpriced possessions, I felt lighter than I had in years. The first hint had been dropped. Soon, very soon, they would begin to understand just how dramatically their plans were about to change. The first crack in Jessica's confidence appeared 3 weeks later. I was gardening in my front yard when I heard shouting from their house next door. Through the open windows, I could hear Jessica's voice, shrill with panic. What do you mean, declined? I've been using this card for years. I couldn't hear Michael's response, but I could imagine it. The credit cards were hitting their limits. The bills were coming due. The financial house of cards they'd built was starting to wobble. That afternoon, Jessica appeared at my door, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. "Margaret, I wonder if I could ask a tiny favor." "Of course, dear. It's just that we're having a small cash flow issue. Nothing serious, just a timing thing with some investments. I was wondering if you and Robert might be able to help us out with a short-term loan, just until our finances stabilize." The audacity was breathtaking. After weeks of mocking my modest gifts and flaunting her excessive spending, she was asking me for money. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Well, we need about $15,000 to cover some immediate expenses. But it would just be temporary, maybe a month or two."
$15,000.
More than half of what I'd been planning to give her before she'd laughed at my retirement gift. "I see," I said. "And what would you put up as collateral for this loan?" Jessica blinked, clearly not having expected this question. "Collateral? Margaret, we're family. Surely we don't need to. Business is business, dear. Even among family. But we're good for it. You know we'll inherit everything eventually, so there's no risk to you." There it was again. The assumption that our assets were already theirs, that they were entitled to our money both now and in the future. "I'll need to discuss it with Robert," I said. "And our financial advisor." "Financial advisor?" Jessica's voice cracked slightly. "Oh yes. We've been working with a wonderful woman, Patricia Wells. She's been helping us restructure our estate planning, making sure everything is organized properly." The color drained from Jessica's face. "Restructure? Nothing for you to worry about, I'm sure. I'll let you know about the loan." I closed the door on her shocked expression, leaving her standing on my porch with her mouth hanging open. Michael's confrontation came 2 days later. He stormed into our house without knocking, his face red with anger and panic. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" "Language, Michael," I said calmly, not looking up from my crossword puzzle. "Don't give me that. Jessica says you've been talking to lawyers, that you're restructuring things." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm being responsible about estate planning." "Estate planning?" His voice was getting louder. "What kind of estate planning?" "You can't just change things without talking to us first." I set down my pencil and looked at him, really looked at him. When had my son become this person? This entitled, demanding stranger who felt he had the right to dictate how I handled my own affairs? "Actually, Michael, I can do whatever I want with my own property and money. It's called ownership." "But we're your family. We have a right to know what you're planning." "A right?" I stood up slowly. "Tell me, Michael, what right do you think you have to my money? I'm your son. Everything you have should come to me when you die." "Should." The word hung in the air between us. Says who? Says tradition. Says normal families. Says the fact that I'm your only child. "I see. And what have you done to earn this inheritance?" Michael stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Earn it? I'm your son. I shouldn't have to earn my own inheritance." Interesting perspective. I sat back down and picked up my crossword. "Tell me, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without wanting something? When was the last time you defended me instead of your wife?" This isn't about." "Mom, you're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I looked up at him again. "Your wife humiliated me at my own retirement party. She mocked my gift in front of everyone I've worked with for 40 years. She posted about it on social media for strangers to laugh at. And what did you do?" Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "She was just joking." "No, Michael. She was cruel. And you let her be cruel. You participated in it. You made it clear that her right to mock me was more important than my dignity." "Mom, please, you're taking this too seriously." "And now," I continued, "she's demanding that I sell my house so you can move into it. She's planning how to spend my money before I'm dead. She's treating me like an inconvenience standing between her and her inheritance." "She's not. We're not." "Yes, you are. And the saddest part is that you're so blinded by her pretty face and expensive tastes that you can't see what she's turned you into." Michael's anger crumbled into desperation. Mom, please. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. We need this. We're drowning in debt, and we were counting on my death to solve your financial problems. The silence that followed was deafening. The final confrontation came at my birthday dinner, a celebration I'd insisted on hosting myself in my own home with the entire extended family present. Jessica had protested, suggesting an expensive restaurant instead, but I'd been firm. This needed to ha. After dinner, as we were having cake and coffee, Jessica stood up with that familiar confident smile. Since we're all here together, she announced, Michael and I have some exciting news to share. I felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't part of my plan, but it might actually work out better. We've been working with Margaret and Robert on some estate planning, she continued, and we're excited to announce that we'll be taking a more active role in managing the family's financial future. The room went quiet. My sister frowned, Robert's brother looked confused, and our friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. We'll be moving into this beautiful house soon. Jessica gestured around our dining room to help take care of Margaret and Robert as they age. And we'll be managing their assets to ensure the family's financial security for generations to come. The presumption was breathtaking. She was announcing their takeover of our lives as if it were a done deal, presenting it as an act of generosity rather than the power grab it really was. How lovely, my sister said carefully. And Margaret, you're comfortable with this arrangement? All eyes turned to me. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for weeks. I stood up slowly, reached into my purse, and pulled out the burgundy scarf. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the now silent room, before we discuss future arrangements, I think it's time Jessica learned what was really in her retirement gift. Jessica's confident expression faltered as I held up the scarf. Margaret, what are you? This scarf, I said, walking around the table so everyone could see, contained something that Jessica was too quick to judge to discover. With deliberate care, I opened the hidden pocket I'd sewn into the lining. The room held its collective breath as I withdrew the envelope. Inside this envelope, I continued, was a cashier's check for $27,000, my entire life savings, intended to help you and Michael pay off your debts and start fresh. Jessica's face went white. Michael half rose from his chair, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Also in this envelope, I continued, pulling out the deed transfer document, was the deed to my cottage in Cape Cod, the one worth approximately $200,000. Both properties were to be transferred to you, Jessica, as a retirement gift from a mother-in-law who wanted nothing more than to see her family happy and secure. The silence was deafening. Jessica sank back into her chair as if her legs had given out. Total value of the gift you laughed at and mocked on social media? Nearly $250,000. My sister gasped. Robert's brother whistled low. Our friends stared in shock. But here's the interesting part. I continued, my voice getting stronger. The transfer had an expiration date. 30 days from the retirement party. If Jessica didn't sign the papers within that time frame, the offer would be void. I looked directly at Jessica, whose face had gone from white to green. Yesterday was day 30. The documents in my hands might as well have been dynamite for the explosive effect they had. Jessica let out a small, strangled sound. Michael looked like he might vomit, and the rest of the room sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. You mean, Robert's brother said slowly, she threw away $250,000 because she mocked the wrapping? That's exactly what I mean. Jessica found her voice first, though it came out as a whisper. You can't do this. Those papers are still valid. I'll sign them now. I'm afraid not. I carefully folded the documents and returned them to the envelope. Legal documents have expiration dates for a reason. The offer is void. But your family, Michael burst out. You have to give us another chance. Another chance? I looked around the room at our family and friends, all of whom were watching this drama unfold with fascination and horror. Another chance to mock my gifts? Another chance to plan how to spend my money? Another chance to treat me like an inconvenience. I walked back to my place at the head of the table, still holding the envelope. You see, what you never understood is that my gift wasn't really about the money or the property. It was about respect. It was about recognizing that I had value, that my efforts mattered, that I deserved basic courtesy and appreciation. Jessica started to cry, not the pretty, delicate tears of a Southern belle, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone watching their future crumble. Instead, I continued, you chose to humiliate me. You chose to mock me publicly. You chose to post about my cheap gift on social media for strangers to laugh at. You chose to plan my funeral before I was dead and spend my money before you'd inherited it. We're sorry, Michael said desperately. We're so sorry. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to look. You didn't know because you assumed I was too stupid, too poor, too irrelevant to give a gift worthy of your attention. I sat down and smiled, the first genuinely peaceful smile I'd felt in years. But here's what you really didn't know. I've spent the last month completely restructuring my estate. My will has been rewritten. My assets have been moved into trusts. My future care has been arranged and funded. The color drained from Robert's face as the implications hit him. Jessica, Michael, you are no longer beneficiaries of anything I own. My house will go to charity when I die. My money will fund scholarships for deserving students. My possessions will be donated to people who actually need them. You can't, Jessica shrieked. We have debts. We have obligations. We were counting on. You were counting on my death to solve your problems. How sadly ironic that your cruelty at my retirement party has actually given me a new lease on life. I stood up one final time, looking around the table at the shocked faces of our family and friends. You laughed at my gift, Jessica. You mocked what you thought was my cheapness, my irrelevance, my failure to meet your standards. But the real gift was my silence afterward. I could have told everyone immediately what you'd thrown away. I could have shamed you publicly the way you shamed me. I paused, letting that sink in. Instead, I chose to let you reveal your true character all on your own. I let you plan how to spend my money, demand my house, mock my concerns, and treat me like an obstacle to your happiness. I let you show everyone exactly who you really are. Jessica was sobbing openly now, her perfect makeup streaked down her cheeks. Michael looked broken, aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a life to live. A real life, with people who value me for who I am rather than what I might leave them. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back one last time. Oh, and Jessica? You might want to return that BMW. I hear the repo men can be quite persistent. As I left them sitting there in the wreckage of their assumptions, surrounded by family members who would never look at them the same way again, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete and total peace. The war was over, and I had won, not through cruelty or revenge, but through the simple act of choosing my own dignity over their expectations. Outside on my porch, I could hear the murmur of shocked conversation beginning inside, punctuated by Jessica's continued sobbing. Soon, the story would spread through our entire extended family, through Robert's work friends, through the social circles where Jessica had once held court. Everyone would know that she had literally laughed away a fortune because she was too arrogant to look beyond the surface of an old woman's gift. I opened the envelope one last time and looked at the documents that could have changed their lives. Then I smiled and tucked them back into the scarf. Some gifts, I realized, are too precious to waste on people who can't recognize their value. And some lessons are worth every penny they cost to teach.